What day is it? The date!
12th May, Thursday.
What year?
A killing machine from the future that travels back in time to kill somebody either sounds like a great idea for a fun action movie or Last Tuesday. Jesus, that was a weird company picnic.
It was the machine, Sarah.
But in this case, we are actually talking about a fun action movie, one that has become a genre classic,
Come with me if you want to live.
The Terminator.
Terminator, Cyberdyne Systems Model 101.
We did look at the Terminator films in the early days of this channel, but we thought we'd have a look at the first two films again with fresh eyes. Lots of researchers and companies are working on machine learning and artificial intelligence for various real-world applications, from being able to fire people from customer support jobs to being able to fire artists, writers, health professionals, soldiers, factory workers, taxi drivers, or in fact anybody except the programmers researching artificial intelligence.
I'm sure there's a point to all of this.
This is despite almost every single piece of speculative fiction that deals with AI showing us an almost guaranteed path towards the end of humanity. But if you can't beat them, join them. So I've used Sam Fine's own artificial intelligence algorithm, ChatBarrel, to update our original review with even more stories of bullshit and woe. James Cameron had been working in various jobs in the film industry, usually on low-budget fare. He worked variously as a poster artist, or an effects artist on films like Escape from New York, before taking over, for a time, the directing of a horror film called Piranha 2. After having been fired and subsequently wanting his name removed from the film, Cameron was in Rome during the film's post-production. Around this time, he'd had a fever dream that would inspire him to create, along with his later wife, producer Gail Ann Hurd, a low-budget film about a robot assassin from the future. Meanwhile, I had a fever dream once where I was playing golf in quicksand, but it turns out I was sleepwalking and had stepped into the cat's litter box.
I'm Reese, Sergeant TechCom, BN 38416, assigned to protect you. You've been targeted for termination.
Robots and computers turning on their human masters was not a new concept. I mean, there was Westworld, Colossus, the Forbin Project, and of course, most terrifying of all, Small Wonder. But for the Terminator, Cameron and Hurd had managed to scrape together enough of a budget to tell a relatively small, intimate sci-fi horror story in a way that made the film rarely feel cheap and nasty. The money is all on the screen. It's like somebody taped the film's $6.5 million budget directly to the multiplex screen, which really must have sucked for people who bought tickets to see the late session of The Karate Kid. The Terminator has a simple premise, but it is one that requires a lot of exposition in order for the audience to understand why all of this is happening. In the future, the machines will rebel against man and start a nuclear war. So, the next time you swear at the printer, just think about what happens in the Terminator. Have I mentioned how much I absolutely love Paper Jams? And you're looking just a little low on cyan. I'm just going to drop everything and dash to the store to get you a new cartridge. To hell with it, I'll get you a whole new set of ink and some premium paper, and while we're at it, a solid gold USB cable. Psst, I think he bought it. We're all good until he gets confused about paper size again.
That's what we're gonna find out.
A naked man turns up confused in Los Angeles, and no, he wasn't at a bachelor party. Another man turns up less confused but also naked, a problem solved by killing some oddly well-spoken 30-something gang members hanging out at the observatory. Both men find themselves clothing and weapons. There's even a lesson about karma before this fella starts tracking down somebody called Sarah Connor.
Sarah Connor?
Yes?
Meanwhile, another Sarah Connor's life is fairly carefree, whipping around town on her motor scooter. In the heady and glamorous world of waitressing in a diner, Sarah Connor handles the vicissitudes of food service as best she can.
Look at it this way, in 100 years, who's gonna care?
Our Sarah Connor is stood up by her date and she goes out by herself, leaving her roommate home with her boyfriend. But another Sarah Connor has been murdered, and Sarah, clearly not the dead one, worries that she's next, especially when there's this creepy guy following her. It turns out the creepy guy is not trying to kill her, but protect her from this fella, who's already killed multiple people called Sarah Connor and her roommate and her boyfriend. Then we have an extended game of cat and mouse, as Sarah and her new guardian, Kyle Reese, try to stay one step ahead of this fella, who is not what he seems. And this is where the film really shows how it's got its shit together. By the way, it skillfully dumps a hell of a lot of exposition into the movie's second act.
Not a robot. Cyborg. Cybernetic organism.
No, he was bleeding.
So stop me if you've heard this one before. In the future, the machines take over, start a nuclear war, almost wipe out humanity. However, one man will rally the survivors and defeat the machines. But a last gasp by the machines sees them sending back in time a Terminator, a cyborg, a killing machine covered with real flesh. Its mission to kill John Connor's mother, who turns out to be... Oh, Sarah Connor did not see that coming.
And it absolutely will not stop. Ever.
The machines had managed to use some rudimentary time machine equipment that they had lying around the place. Like how your office probably has a supply cupboard full of dusty Guitar Hero controllers, fax machines, and Windows phones. You have to go into this machine naked, without any complex machines. But we will just hand wave away the whole part about the Terminator, a complex machine. They can go through it apparently because it's covered in skin, so you can send back a complex machine if it has a realistic asshole. Anyway, the important point is the Terminator is here to kill Sarah, and Kyle is there to protect her.
They cannot make things like that yet.
Not yet. Not for about 40 years.
Are you saying it's from the future?
One possible future.
Kyle and Sarah are picked up by the cops. Their criminal psychologist, Sibelman, seems to be reveling in Kyle's story.
I could make a career out of this guy. You see how clever this part is? How it doesn't require a shred of proof?
The Terminator shows up, but isn't taking any static from the desk sergeant. Sarah, who had been on the fence about Kyle's stories, decides that perhaps his intricate tales have some merit and takes him a bit more seriously. They hide out, she dresses his wound, they build pipe bombs, then they play board games like Connect 4, or maybe they make love, I forget which. Probably the latter, since it's in this scene you realise why Kyle was sent back and not John Connor. Because, you know, that bit about John Connor not being able to travel back in time to save his mum because he had a root canal scheduled was just a bluff.
Your son gave me a message to give to you. I can't help you with what you must soon face except to say that the future is not set.
Kyle Reese is to become John Connor's father. So, that is certainly an interesting Father's Day present. There's another chase, and the Terminator is blown up in a big rig. The end. But it's not. The endoskeleton survives. Sarah and a wounded Kyle hide out in a factory, a highly automated factory. Oh, Jim. And it's here that Sarah discovers her strength.
Reese! On your feet, soldier!
Kyle manages to blow up the Terminator again. The end. But no, Kyle's dead and the Terminator's not quite done until Sarah finds the button marked crepe. Sarah narrates some tapes to leave to her son, which is a way of working through what she's been through and for what must come. So, this was great. Here is a film that's not made with a huge budget, yet looked better than most sci-fi films of the day. James Cameron, being a former effects artist himself, knew he had to get good effects people in on the film. The Terminator started off as Arnold Schwarzenegger, but over time it accumulates more and more damage, leaving it looking less human until the end of the film, when Arnold Schwarzenegger was no longer listed on the call sheets. Stan Winston's prosthetic and puppet effects were great at the time. Unnerving, especially when it's literally unnerving, though some shots do stand up least well to scrutiny decades later. The stop motion 101 is slightly jerky, but it's augmented by full-size puppets, and judicious use of both front and rear projection. Some of the model heads of the Terminator are just shy of 100% convincing, just as Arnold Schwarzenegger's grasp of the English language at this time was also shy of 100% convincing.
Fuck you, asshole.
This is a film that would launch 1,000 cheap imitators, but even worse, 10,000 bad Arnold Schwarzenegger impressions, like this one.
2 all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickled onions on a sesame seed bun.
The film's protagonist is Linda Hamilton as Sarah Connor. She's a young woman living her life in Los Angeles with her pet iguana Pugsley. Side note, some of that Pugsley fanfiction does go to very dark places. Sarah is drawn into an incredible situation not of her own making, but will eventually be worn down by the reality of it. A relentless killing machine from the future is after her. By the end of the film, she's accepted the situation and her role in it. She even gets her own pithy line when defeating the Terminator.
You're terminated, fucker.
Hamilton would really amp up the character in the sequel, but that's a story for another day.
Why does it want me?
There was a nuclear war. This whole place. Everything. It's gone.
Michael Biehn as Kyle Reese has to play a battle-hardened action hero on a suicide mission, and is blessed with, or cursed with, depending on your point of view, pages and pages of world-building exposition. Everything we know about the future comes from Kyle's mouth or one of his flashbacks. It's a thankless role, modulating between humorless hero and walking exposition fountain, but Bean does a good job in the role. Cameron's script has Kyle becoming weary when he's recalling the events that led to his arrival in 1980s LA. The film works because it breaks up all of this world building into small, easily digestible chunks, like candy corn put into a NutriBullet. The rest of the cast is filled with good to great actors, Paul Winfield and Lance Hendrickson as cops trying to protect Sarah, Bill Paxton and Brian Thompson as punks, and of course Earl Bowen as the psychiatrist Silberman, who would appear in each of the first 3 Terminator films. It's often tempting on a low-budget film to put lesser actors into the minor role to save on the budget, but Cameron usually puts the best people in he can afford, so you're not pulled out of the action because one underpaid day player phones it in. One person became the opposite of underpaid due to his role in The Terminator, eventually becoming synonymous with the role and the franchise, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Even when the film was in pre-production, he was a rising star. He'd starred in Conan the Barbarian. The Terminator would set him on a course where he would become one of the biggest action stars in the world for the next decade or so. His catchphrase,
I'll be back,
almost didn't make it into the film because Arnold couldn't say it properly. I mean, if you really want to nitpick, almost every other line spoken by the Terminator is barely intelligible anyway. But I'll bet Schwarzenegger is glad it stayed in. The Terminator actually has very few lines over the course of the film. But having Arnold play the villain wasn't the original plan. The Terminator was originally conceived of as being somebody who wouldn't make you immediately shit your pants if they rang your doorbell. Schwarzenegger and Cameron had first talked about Arnold playing the Kyle Reese character, which certainly would have been a thing given the amount of dialogue he has. Both later had the idea that the Terminator role suited Arnold more, and that fateful decision probably made everything else slot into place. Schwarzenegger's casting was the last piece of the puzzle as far as financing the film. Schwarzenegger's body language sells the character more than any dialogue, and the idea of Schwarzenegger having to explain the plot as Reese does conjure up the idea of an awful lot of outtakes. This Terminator is usually known as a T-800 or a Model 101. So apparently the T-800 part is the internal spec, and the Model 101 is the Schwarzenegger skin. So, now that you know this, you will be able to impress people at dinner parties. Also, I can't make that dinner party you're having because I'm double booked with, I don't know. The film had originally been set for filming in Toronto when Schwarzenegger's contractual obligation to shoot a Conan sequel pushed Terminator's filming back several months. In the meantime, Cameron, who'd already been working on a script for his sequel to Aliens, also landed a gig to write Rambo First Blood Part 2.
But there was one man.
James Cameron, with his fine art background, also created much of the concept art for his films.
You're talking about things that I haven't done yet in the past tense. It's driving me crazy.
An important question is this: how many Terminators does it take to prevent the invention of a light bulb? One to kill Edison, and realistically a second Terminator to kill whoever really invented it. One thing that really sells the story are Kyle's flashbacks to life in the future, which gives a glimpse of what will happen if the Terminator isn't stopped. These had the potential to either break the film's budget or be so laughably cheap looking as to undermine the rest of the film. The effects here are absolutely fantastic. You kind of wish for more future sequences, but as a later film would show, you really should be careful what you wish for. The Terminator is a great popcorn flick, and that is not to denigrate it in any way, because it's a genuinely great science fiction movie. It creates a universe that various filmmakers would attempt to mine for decades. Unfortunately, Hollywood graveyards are filled with directorial careers of people who attempted to follow James Cameron and direct a Terminator film. It's only a shame that Michael Bay and Brett Ratner haven't yet tried. This first film tells its story cleanly, with a lot of style, a lot more style than you'd expect, and keeps the world building to just what's needed. Some might say uncharitably to paper over the holes, like how come a robot is covered in flesh, can go through a time machine, but a gun or a bomb can't. I mean, in that case, couldn't Kyle just swallow a bomb? You know who else knows about swallowing a bomb? The investors of later Terminator films. The Terminator also has that theme by Brad Fiedel. The synth score with its slightly off rhythms does come off as one of the better 80s synth scores. The main theme has become one of the most iconic movie themes of the 1980s. It's no disco remix of Out of Africa, but it is certainly competitive. Kyle Reese really did make things hard for himself, when all he really had to do to beat the Terminator was to get there first and race around to every payphone in Los Angeles and remove one page from the white pages. The Terminator series' other oft-quoted line doesn't actually appear in this first movie, well, the theatrical version, but was filmed.
There's no fate but what we make for ourselves.
Terminator, with its mix of slasher movie and science fiction action vibe, was a modest hit on its 1984 release, hitting number 21 at that year's box office, outgrossed by the original Red Dawn, Bachelor Party, Revenge of the Nerds, and Breakin'. The Terminator would find even greater fortune on home video, where it gave dozens of less talented filmmakers a blueprint on how to do a low-budget science fiction action film with a touch of horror about it. While the action genre aisle of the video rental store wasn't labelled as Terminator ripoffs as such, it may as well have been. Over the years, how much beer and pizza has been sold on the back of people getting together to watch The Terminator.
That's one large pepperoni pizza. Anything else, Chief?
Don't forget wings and barbecue sauce.
James Cameron wasn't quite on top of the world yet. He would follow up Terminator with a sequel to somebody else's film, Aliens, which was another success, and then The Abyss, which financially at least was less of a success, before in 1991 returning to the world that he'd created. But there is no video review of Terminator 2 but that which we make ourselves. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.